Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of LFM. This was definitely an interesting one for me here at Zandvoort. We had to compete at both levels of the Sprint Series this week, as after our first race in the Rookie Sprint Series, our license got upgraded, and that actually locked us out from trying it again. And I'll say, this week at the higher level Sprint Series was definitely difficult for me, and unfortunately was not without incident. But anyways, let's get to it and see what happened this week. We'll start with the Rookie Sprint. For this one I qualified with a 1:36.7 or so. That was good enough to put me in P8 for the race.
Alright, here we go. Qualified P8. Got a little bit of a run early. Oh, gonna pinch me though. Alright, let's just relax. Do this first turn.
Say, relax might need to be the word of the week for me on this one. Maybe not in this first race, but definitely in the later ones. Here early in this race, we do have a bit of a close call from behind from a Ferrari. They end up going into the barrier, unfortunately. They did a great job avoiding an incident, but they might have had to sacrifice the race for that one, which made me feel kind of bad. Anyways, back to us. We got through the first few turns of the lap cleanly, and the race is already kind of settled. ACC kind of showed there for a second that I was in 7th while I was racing. I was kind of excited about that, but it quickly corrected itself back to 8th. So a net position gain of 0 at the beginning of the race, which honestly I will take any day. Coming into the middle sector of the track for the first time, this is where I was really struggling the most. It was pretty difficult for me in practice to find time here, and before the rookie sprint I'd only really been able to give it the better part of an hour in practice. The performance through here was at least decent enough to be pretty competitive in the top split of rookies this week, but once we get to the higher level races it's just not going to be fast enough. After that sector we start coming down towards turns 10 and 11, or the Audi S. There's a big slightly downhill braking zone right here, which can be kind of tricky, and ideally you want to hit that curve a little bit on the inside before you go into the second turn. We kick through it cleanly there, but we do lose a bit of ground from the cars up front. So now we're sitting at about a half a second ahead and a half a second behind, so we've got a little bit of our own space here, which will take us towards the end of the first lap, still in P8. Not sure why ACC is saying P9 here. As we come down the main straight, the two Ferraris ahead are going to be a little erratic as the one in front's trying to break the toe from the one behind, but they're going to go side by side into turn 1. However, the leading Ferrari is going to be able to defend the position. It allows us to close the gap for the time being, but this week we really just weren't fast enough to keep up with the lead cars. Skipping ahead pretty far into the race, we had mostly kind of just been hot lapping by ourselves trying to practice the track, but at this point there is going to be a Ferrari that has kind of closed in on us.
Gonna let him go.
Had to sacrifice that position there to that Ferrari after making the mistake on the second to last turn, which put us down into P9 for the time being. Definitely not the result we were looking for. Skipping ahead further though, we are going to get a couple positions back, as up here there's a Porsche that has been spun off to our left. In fact, we go a little deep and almost kind of hit him there. Ferrari off the track into the grass up here, they just kind of let us pass. And there was kind of a whole story with this one. It puts us up into P6 after having also passed someone in the pits. We'll skip to the final lap because the video frame rate got a little rough there, but it looks like the Ferrari just kind of hit the wall towards the beginning of that lap and just got a lot of damage, was struggling to keep control of their car. Seemed like maybe they were trying to force things, and here they just were in the grass on the inside line and just barely clipped that Porsche right there. So it might have been better if they simply returned to garage or just waited for a really big gap to kind of limp it back to the pits. But either way, that gave us P6 coming into the end of the race. Not as glorious of a finish as I would have hoped for, but high position at the very least. And I honestly thought I'd try it again, but we weren't allowed to after that license upgrade. We had to go into the higher level sprint, and in this one I did practice a bit more and I was able to bring my qualifying time to a low 1:36. But everyone here is much faster. Still was good enough for P15 at the time though.
Here we go. I'm very nervous.
And I was certainly very nervous. This was my first race out of the rookie series, and going into this first turn I had to dip into the pit exit a little bit to avoid contact up front. It does cause me to lose one position early, but I was happy to get through that moment with everyone alive. I did feel like I immediately noticed that drivers were a bit more comfortable being close to each other in this series. In fact, going into turn 3 here, we are going to have the Mercedes behind get close to overtaking us. They're going to get alongside, but they're just not quite able to get it for the time being. I was definitely having a really hard time relaxing though in this race, and what had kind of happened is in the rookies I had performed pretty well, so ELO got relatively high. I was sitting around 1700 ELO after finishing that first rookie sprint, which caused a bit of an issue in regards to it putting me immediately in split 1 at the higher level. And honestly, I just really didn't feel like I deserved to be here at the moment, but I was trying my best to see if I could make it work. I mean, we weren't all the way in the back here to start, so our lap times in this one were at least somewhat competitive, but I had seen a lot of the people up front running all the way down into the low 134s, and we just weren't anywhere close to that pace. Now, coming around turn 9, we are going to see the Mercedes behind did actually get the run on me, and we're going to end up going side by side down to the Audi S. And unfortunately, this is going to rattle me, and I'm going to miss my braking point.
I'm so sorry.
Say, the nerves really got to me there, and this is really what I didn't want to happen on my very first lap in the higher level. And that does kind of end up putting us in dead last for the time being. Fortunately, after the race was over, I did message Sergio saying sorry about that on lap 1, and he was actually super nice about it, which made me feel a little bit better. And honestly, online I've seen a lot of negativity towards LFM, but my interactions with everyone have actually been pretty good so far. I mean, mistakes do happen. As we come up on halfway through the race, we do get one pass on a car that had pulled off to the side. I actually think they simply had to log off. Otherwise, we had passed a few cars in the pits that had gotten into incidents and had damage they needed to repair. It put us up in P21, and once again, we were kind of just hot lapping for the time being. Going into the first turn here, though, we're actually going to have 3 cars kind of end up in an incident. And unfortunately, Sergio is going to end up a little bit tied up in this one as well. But it does give us 2 more positions up into P19. Looking back at it from Sergio's point of view, it looks like the Porsche and McLaren ahead of him just had a little bit of contact on the exit of turn 1, and it spun the Porsche and just kind of rattled Sergio, causing him to get loose when he thought he'd have to try to avoid an incident. At this point though, all we could really do was attempt to catch up to Blackbird ahead. They have a 2-second lead on us at the moment, but as we come in towards the end of the race, we are going to decrease that gap a little bit. It's going to end up being about 1.5 seconds instead, but we just really weren't able to pull out the time to really gain any ground. So we're going to finish that one in a P19. This did cause my elo to drop a little bit, but it still wasn't enough to drop me out of the top split. I decided to try it one more time, setting a slightly slower qualifying lap this time. And people were even faster in this race, as it was only good enough to put us in P20 out of 21. Honestly, I was okay with this. After the last race, I kind of wanted to start from the back anyway. In fact, I almost didn't qualify for this one, but decided it was best for me to go ahead and try anyway. Going into turn 1 here, there's going to be a bit of contact ahead of us. It's going to throw us out wide as we try to avoid it, and that's going to allow the Ferrari that was behind us to dip underneath, putting us into dead last for now. And with no one around me, I am going to be extra careful at the beginning of this lap, so that will compromise my speed a little bit, and coming in and out of turn 3, we'll lose a bit of ground to the pack ahead. With this being the first lap though, we will close that gap back down as everybody ahead kind of settles into their race. Coming up into turn 6, we are going to get a couple positions as 2 cars end up in the gravel off to the left, putting us into a whopping P19 for the time being. That'll take us into the middle sector of the track for the first time this race, which I kind of said earlier was the most difficult part of it for me to get lap time. We do manage to stay in relatively close attention to the cars ahead of us on this first lap though. Now going towards the Audi S for the first time, I definitely had memories of the previous race going poorly where I ended up causing that incident, so I am going to brake really early here. I do see the Ferrari end up almost kind of doing the same thing I did, but they were good enough to bring it under control instead. And with that, that'll start to round out our first lap with a net position gain of 1 after the accident on turn 6. Doing everything I can just to maintain some sort of contact with the cars ahead of me for now. Coming into the first turn on the second lap, there is going to be an accident that happens ahead of us, and I am going to end up tapping this Ferrari in the back as they were able to see it a little bit earlier than I did, so our braking points were a little bit wonky. That tap in the back almost threw the Ferrari into that spun out Mercedes, but it looks like ahead of us a similar thing had happened. They tapped the back of the person in front of them and it spun them onto the side. That gave us one more position for now, but we lost a lot of momentum after that tap. Moving ahead a few minutes, we are able to close that gap a little bit, but we are going to get another position with another car spun off to the side here, putting us up into P17 for the time being. Looking back at it, it looks like the BMW ahead had barely clipped the grass on the outside, sending them into a spin on the inside, and they just barely tapped the back end of that McLaren. Honestly, it almost felt like netcode with how close that one was. At this point though, we had the attention of Shorty behind, who was the second highest elo in this lobby.
I'm going to open it up for him. I'm going to let him go, because he's faster.
They had been involved in an incident earlier and were definitely just faster, so it was a matter of time really before that move was going to happen. So we do lose one position there going back into P18. At that point, not much else will happen for the next few minutes, but we are going to start to also get the attention from Miller behind us in the Mercedes, and we'll have a bit of a defensive battle for a while, just trying to see if we can hold them off. Through the course of that, though, we'll see there's a yellow flag ahead, and there's going to end up being a green Porsche that has spun off, and as we come around this turn, they're actually going to start coming back on the track, and we just narrowly avoid contact right there. This puts us up into P17 for the time being, but we are still going to have the attention of the Mercedes behind.
I think Miller's probably going to get frustrated. I've lost a lot of pace these last couple laps.
So it won't matter too much for them now though, because as we go into the next lap on the first turn, they are going to get a better exit on turn 1, and I kind of have to concede the position before we go into turn 3. And that's going to allow that green Porsche from earlier to actually get pretty close behind us. And we'll stay in this position between these two for a couple laps at this point, but once we get up ahead, the Porsche is going to be able to make a really good move on me going into turn 6. I'm going to have to concede another position down into P19. Just really struggling to keep up with these guys' pace in the top split of the higher level sprint series. And that'll take us into the middle sector of the track, which I continue to struggle with, and we'll lose a little bit of ground to that Porsche, but we will get it back later after a few laps. They're going to have a bit of an incident going through this section. As they spin, I actually had a hard time reacting enough and do end up tapping them a little bit in the back going around the outside. So we do technically get the position, but we're going to lose a lot of momentum once again, and there's going to end up being another McLaren behind that kind of comes to our attention. As we come into the end of the race though, they're not going to end up having passed us. However, there is going to be a different McLaren that has got a pretty good run on us, and we're going to have a really good defensive battle coming into the end of the last lap. Just doing whatever I can to hold them off and try to maintain what is P18, even though ACC is saying P19 at the moment. But yeah, definitely a rough showing for me on my first races at the higher level sprint series, hoping that my elo levels out a little bit and maybe it takes me out of that top split. I mean, I like being in the top split, but if I'm not going to be competitive enough, it probably needs to drop me down. We'll see what Spa has in for us next week. I'm a little bit more familiar with that track, so maybe I can be more competitive, and we'll also see if I end up staying in the top split for that one as well. But if you did enjoy the video, feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. We're going to continue putting out more. Maybe we'll improve our performance as well. We'll see. But until then, we'll see you next time.